Chapter 2. Danny and Dan's evil plan was only foiled by the fact that neither of them knew where Vlad had gone. This only tripped them up for a few minutes before they came up with a new, better plan. This one involved splitting up. Danny made his way down to Vlad's home theater where his game consoles were already plugged in. Vlad had set them up when he moved Danny into his mansion in an effort to make the grieving teenager more comfortable, but Danny had been too depressed to play anything up until now. He booted up Doomed and was struck with the impulse to text Sam and Tucker to join him. Then he remembered that they were dead. He felt uneasy, low in his gut, but the soul-crushing anguish never came. He tamped down the feeling and started up an online game. 10 minutes into the match, Dan floated down through the ceiling, looking absolutely feral. Danny let his character die and waited patiently for Dan to explain his blitzed-out aura and inferno hair. Dan screeched, fired up an ectoblast, and scorched a line into the ceiling. "Won!" he screamed, and then laughed. At least, Danny recognized it as laughter. He wasn't sure if the average human would have. Danny leaned back in his comfy gaming chair. "Won what?" Dan pinned him with a blazing, demonic grin. "Won office," he said. "This stupid house doesn't stand a chance." Danny smirked. "Nice." He started up another match, and the ghost left the way he came. Over the next 2 hours, Dan came through 27 more times, each time screaming and burning another tally mark into the ceiling. Danny gathered that he was counting any room he destroyed, not just offices. He was grateful that the house hadn't burned down yet, because he was really enjoying playing Doomed after such a long break. At tally number 33, Dan seemed to be losing steam. After marking 36, he collapsed onto the couch and didn't get up again. After Danny's match finished, he looked over to find that the ghost was asleep, one arm dangling, and a leg thrown over the backrest. Danny smiled fondly. His ghost really did deserve to have some fun after everything the two of them had been through. Danny shut off the game and got to work on part 2 of the new plan: figure out where Vlad went. They had brainstormed a bunch of elaborate methods, many of which Tucker would have been capable of executing. Danny didn't mention this after the first time he brought it up, since it seemed to cause Dan to temporarily lose his mind. But neither Danny nor Dan were tech-savvy enough to trace Vlad's cell phone or hack government satellite data. Then, Danny had a brain blast. Call all of Vlad's residences and see if he picked up. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. For survival reasons, Danny already knew the address of each of Vlad's numerous estates, so that was one step taken care of. Next, Danny had to figure out how to block his caller ID, because he was pretty sure Vlad would be smart enough to ignore the call if he knew it was Danny. After all, they were literally out to get him. A quick Google search resolved that problem. Danny was now ready for step 3, make a bunch of phone calls without letting Vlad know it was him. He glanced over at Dan one more time and snapped a pic. He was drooling embarrassingly. Danny got back to work and dialed. He was met with unpersonalized answering machines for the first 3 numbers he called. Number 4, however, picked up on the 3rd ring. Unfortunately, nobody spoke. Danny was at a loss. He couldn't be sure it was Vlad without hearing his voice. What if they traveled all the way there, only to find it was a burglar who'd picked up? They would have been a pretty stupid burglar, but anything was possible. Danny hung on the line in silence for 10 agonizing seconds before he started panicking. He needed to make Vlad reveal himself. Inspiration struck. Danny blew into the receiver as hard as he could. A shout came from the other end, unmistakably Vlad. Danny smashed end call. The problem with owning 13 cars is the need to keep track of 13 sets of car keys. Vlad had created an elegant solution: a series of hooks near the door, each labeled with a license plate number. This was great news for Danny and Dan because a well-organized garage made it very easy to steal any number of Vlad's cars to execute step 4 of their evil plan: get Vlad. "I want to drive," Dan declared. "You don't know how." The ghost stared dumbfounded at his human counterpart. "Neither do you. We're the same person." Danny offered a shit-eating grin and shrugged. "Okay, you can go first. I'll trade off when you suck at it." He tossed the keys to Dan and vaulted the passenger door of the red Ferrari convertible. Dan stuck out his tongue and floated into the driver's seat. He jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. Nothing happened. He growled and started jiggling it aggressively. Hey, you're gonna break it, Danny shouted. It's already broken. No, it's not. You're just doing it wrong. Danny pulled his phone out of his pocket and opened YouTube. He typed in the search field, "How to turn on a car." A few minutes later, Danny was in the driver's seat and Dan was sulking. "Okay, ready?" Dan grumbled. Danny turned the key, holding his foot on the brake with a bit more force than was strictly necessary, and the engine rumbled to life. He muttered to himself, "Seatbelt on, emergency brake off. Okay." He shifted the car into drive, hit the gas, and slammed the $350,000 convertible straight into the wall of the garage. Danny looked at Dan, moving only his eyes. The rest of him was thoroughly pinned by the airbag that had just exploded in his face. Dan glared back at him from a very similar position. "I get to drive," Dan hissed. Dan turned the key in the ignition and let out a whoop as the white Bentley roared to life. He carefully backed the car out of the garage while Danny spotted him from the side and rolled smoothly across the threshold into the massive driveway. "All right, you're clear," Danny called. He ran over to the passenger door and dove through the open window. Dan flinched as Danny's solid human limbs proceeded to make a tangle of themselves all over the interior of the car to a soundtrack of muffled cursing. Dan flickered intangible to avoid an elbow to the face. Danny? I don't think you could do that anymore." Danny let out a frustrated grunt as he finally arranged himself in a position approaching sitting. He belatedly pushed the seat back, kicked his legs up on the dashboard, and glared at Dan. "Do what?" Dan stifled a laugh and said, "Throwing yourself around expecting gravity and physics to get out of your way?" Danny crossed his ankles and tucked his arms behind his head. "Yeah, whatever. Let's just get out of here." "Okay, buckle your seatbelt," Dan teased. "No." Dan frowned. He eyed the crashed Ferrari in full view ahead of them and looked back at the solitary person in the entire world whom he loved. Danny glanced at him, the image of nonchalance. Unbidden, Dan's awareness turned inward for a fraction of a second, and he glimpsed the turbulent shoreline of the sea of pain that churned constantly in the back of his mind. Danny was human. Danny was vulnerable. The shockwave of Danny's vulnerability sent a tsunami of dread surging through the churning sea, poisonous and suffocating, and... Dan slammed the door on his thoughts. Danny's eyes widened at his ghost's sudden glitching and deafening shriek. "Hey!" Danny shouted. "Are you okay? I'll put my seatbelt on. It's no big deal." He reached for Dan's shoulder. The ghost grabbed his wrist and bored blazing red eyes into Danny's. "No!" he said in a broken scream. Danny had less than a second to draw back in alarm before Dan rushed him and slipped inside Danny's perfectly fitted skin. After a moment of hazy disorientation, Danny found himself in the driver's seat. He tried to rub his throbbing head with his left hand and instead adjusted the rearview mirror with his right. He caught his own eye in the reflection, and it winked back at him, bright red and glowing. He tried to groan and say, "Was that really necessary?" But the words only managed to echo around in his head. "Yes," Dan's voice said firmly. "Now I can keep you safe." Dan lifted a hand and wiggled their fingers in and out of tangibility to demonstrate. "Anyway, now we both get to drive, so that's not bad, right?" He grinned at their reflection and got to work turning the car around. It was supposed to be a 3-point turn, according to the YouTube video, but Dan was trying to be careful. So far, Danny counted no fewer than 11 points.